The days are growing darker. Evil is plaguing this country. As a church, we have to be a voice. We need to stand for what is right. We need to not fear the opinions of others, but to speak with boldness. We need to stand up against the wickedness that this country is embracing. As a church, we need to pray. We need to defend the innocent life. The attack on innocent life is growing greatly. New abortion laws are being passed. Late-term abortions was just passed with other states to follow. Now, there is this idea of infanticide, stating that you can still abort a baby after birth. That's murder. We need to open our mouths and speak the truth. We need to be fasting and praying for innocent life. So what happens to these babies if they are born, if Satan cannot have them killed in the womb? They're born and then they are confused. We are now seeing this attack on children with identity. It is now an option to choose gender X. So let's say you are born of confusion and it is being normalized. I remember being a kid and I wasn't thinking about my sexuality. I was thinking about playing with friends. We are exposing our children at far too young of an age to these very adult conversations. Who is going to protect the children, if not the church, to speak out against this? They are being conditioned. They are being over-sexualized. They're being exposed to things that they should not be exposed to. And it is up to us to speak out against it. So if your child makes it past abortion, makes it past the ability to choose gender, then you have examples where more confusion comes and they are learning about very heavy topics. Things that is just bringing bad development to these kids. The over-sexualization of children should tell you, not only are they being over-sexualized, but this is pedophilia. We need to be honest about what's happening in our culture and speak out against it, and to not be afraid of what others will say.
Delegate Tran.
Yes, sir.
How late in a pregnancy would your bill apply if a physician was simply willing to certify that the continuation of the pregnancy would impair the mental health of the woman? How late are we talking about?
Well, so the way the suggestion that we've made in the bill is to say it's in the third trimester and at the, with the certification of the physician. So
how late in the third trimester would you be able to do that?
It's very unfortunate that our physicians, witnesses, were not able to attend today to speak specifically.
No, I'm
to
talking
that.
about your bill. How late in the third trimester could a physician perform an abortion if he indicated it would impair the mental health of the woman?
Or physical health.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm talking about the mental health.
So, I mean, through the third trimester. The third trimester goes all the way up to 40 weeks.
Okay. But to the end of the third trimester.
Yep, I don't think we have a limit in the bill.
So, where it's obvious that a woman is about to give birth, she has physical signs of that she is about to give a birth, would that still be a point at which she could request an abortion if she was so certified? She's dilating.
Mr. Chairman, that would be a decision that the doctor, the physician, and the woman would make.
I understand
at
that. I'm asking
point.
if your bill allows that.
My bill would allow that, yes.
No exception. There was a very contentious committee hearing yesterday when Fairfax County Delegate Kathy Tran made her case for lifting restrictions on third trimester abortions as well as other restrictions now in place. And she was pressed by a Republican delegate about whether her bill would permit an abortion even as a woman is essentially dilating, ready to give birth. And she answered that it would permit an abortion at that stage of labor. Do you support her measure and explain her answer?
Yeah, and I wasn't there, Julie, and I certainly can't speak for Delegate Tran, but I would tell you, first thing I would say is this is why decisions such as this should be made by providers, physicians, and the mothers and fathers that are involved. There are, when we talk about third trimester abortions, these are done with the consent of obviously the mother, with the consent of the physicians, more than one physician, by the way. And it's done in cases where there may be severe deformities, there may be a fetus that's non-viable. So in this particular example, if a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. So I think this was really blown out of proportion. But again, we want the government not to be involved in these types of decisions. We want the decision to be made by the mothers and their providers. And this is why, Julie, that legislators, most of whom are men, by the way, shouldn't be telling a woman what she should and shouldn't be doing with her body.
And do you think multiple physicians should have to weigh in as is currently required? She's trying to lift that requirement.
Well, I think it's always good to get a second opinion and for at least two providers to be involved in that decision, because these decisions shouldn't be taken lightly. And so, I would certainly support more than one provider.
All right, let's go back to the phones now for the governor. We're going to talk now with Mike.
This investigation of Planned Parenthood is based on false premises, one after another after another. It's time to stop wasting time, get on with meaningful work, and stop picking on women and trying to take their choice away. I yield back the balance of my time.
The time of the gentleman has expired. We welcome our distinguished witnesses today. Do you and each of you swear that the testimony that you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And I'll now begin by introducing today's witnesses. The first witness is Dr. Anthony Levatino. Dr. Levatino is a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist. Over the course of his career, Dr. Levatino has practiced obstetrics and gynecology in both private and university settings, including as an associate professor of OBGYN at the Albany Medical College. And Dr. Levatino, we'll begin with you. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to get right to it. Second trimester D&E abortions performed between roughly 14 and 24 weeks of gestation. Your patient today is 17 years old. She's 22 weeks pregnant. Her baby is the length of your hand plus a couple of inches. And she's been feeling her baby kick for the last several weeks, but she's asleep on an operating room table. You walk into that operating room scrubbed and gowned, and after removing laminaria, you introduce a suction catheter into the uterus. This is a 14 French suction catheter. If she were 12 weeks pregnant or less, basically the width of your hand or smaller, you could basically do the entire procedure with this. But babies this big don't fit through catheters this size. After suctioning the amniotic fluid out from around the baby, you introduce an instrument called a Sofer clamp. It's about 13 inches long. It's made of stainless steel. The business end of this clamp is about 2.5 inches long and 1/2 inch wide. There are rows of sharp teeth. This is a grasping instrument. When it gets a hold of something, it does not let go. A D&E procedure is a blind abortion, so picture yourself introducing this and grabbing anything you can blindly and pull, and I do mean hard, and out pops a leg about that big, which you put down on the table next to you. Reach in again, pull out an arm about the same length, which you put down on the table next to you, and use this instrument again and again to tear out the spine, the intestines, the heart and lungs. Head on the baby that size is about the size of a large plum. Can't see it, but you pretty good idea you've got it if you've got your instrument around something and your fingers are spread about as far as they go. You know you did it right if you crush down on the instrument and white material runs out of the cervix. That was the baby's brains. Then you could pull out skull pieces. And you have a day like I had a lot of times, sometimes a little face comes back and stares back at you. Congratulations, you just successfully performed a second trimester D&E abortion. And I don't remember exactly how long it was after my daughter died that I showed up at Albany Medical Center OR number 9 to perform my first second trimester D&E abortion. I wasn't thinking of it as anything special. This was routine to me. But I reached in, literally pulled out an arm or leg, and got sick. You know, earlier on I described stacking up body parts on the side of the table. It's not to, gross people out, to use a simple term. When you do an abortion, you need to keep inventory. You have to make sure you get 2 arms and 2 legs and all the pieces. If you don't, your patient's going to come back infected, bleeding, or dead. So I soldiered on and finished that abortion. And I know it sounds, as I said, hard for people to believe, but I'm telling you straight up my experience. You know, after over 1,200 abortions, first and second trimester up to 24 weeks and all the rest of it, and being very dedicated to it, for the first time in my life, I really looked at that pile of body parts on the side of the table. And I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't see all the money I just made. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter. And I stopped doing late-term abortions after that, and several months later stopped doing all abortions.
Well, we also want to play this clip. Now, if you have kids at home that are watching, get them out of the room because this is very offensive. You have the comedian Michelle Wolf, who spoke at the White House Correspondents' Dinner a few months back, and she is giving her own version of this patriotic salute amid the media's Supreme Court hysteria by saying, I didn't want to say it, I'm going to let her say it. Listen to this, and then we'll get your reaction.
Women, if you need an abortion, get one! If you want an abortion, get one! Women, don't forget, you have the power to give life, and men will try to control that. Don't let them! God bless abortions, and God bless America!
All right, Ben, your reaction?
Oh, she's obviously a delight. I mean, the continual elevation of comedians who have no interest in making you laugh. They only are interested in making you clap, right? They're going to get clapped, or this is what's very important, is that people clap for them. It demonstrates the full-scale leftism of so many on the comedic left. Beyond that, the movement on the left, from safe, legal, and rare to God bless abortion, go get one. I mean, that is so morally bereft. It is so morally empty and insane that it makes you think that a lot of these folks have decided that abortion is not something that ought to be avoided if possible, even if you believe in it, but that abortion is actually a sacrament, that it's a sign of bravery, that it's a sign of something good. You're a better person, not only if you support abortion, but if you've had one because you stood up to the patriarchy. Well, if you see the snuffing out of an incipient human life as something that is affirmatively good, I would say that you are bordering on or in the midst of a deep bout of evil.
When I see pictures of Ben, I just think of it as part of my past, and now I'm me.
When she told me, I didn't believe her. I was shocked. And I was like, I don't believe you. That is not true.
Rebecca really doesn't like thinking about the medical side of this. She doesn't want to develop into a man. So medically transitioning involves a lot of different steps, and every transgender person chooses their own adventure. For Rebecca, the first steps will be puberty blockers, which will pause puberty and prevent her from going through male puberty and developing secondary male characteristics like facial hair and a deeper voice and an Adam's apple that are irreversible. The next step would be cross hormones. So Rebecca's a natal male, and so she would take estrogen to develop and go through female puberty. As far as surgery, she hasn't indicated a desire for that, but that is a decision she gets to make down the road anyway. That's not something she would do before she's 18.
Today we're going to talk about the frontal lobes of the brain and how it relates to discipline and guidance. The frontal lobes are the CEO of the brain. It's the boss of the brain. It's the executive of the brain. And thus it gives us the executive skills. This part of the brain is right behind our forehead, and so these are our frontal lobes. Specifically, we're going to talk about the prefrontal lobes. Now, I run Loving Guidance, so I am a boss. So I can relate to these skills a great deal. Now, they come in two categories. Basically, the frontal lobe and these skills called executive skills have two main parts to them. One is to decide what to do out of all the many things you could do and how to organize and plan that so you can achieve it. At the same time, you got to manage your emotions so you don't get sidetracked and overwhelmed. Often I hear people come up to me and say, oh, you need a Sophie series. You need a Sophie series for the little kids, like a Schubert series, or you need to make this, or you need to write a book about this. And I'm so overwhelmed, I'm like, yeah, right. So my frontal lobes can't handle that information. So let's go and break these two up. There's executive skills that have to do with thinking, and there's executive skills that have to do with managing our emotions. So the thinking executive skills include such things as planning. You got to plan what you want to do. Organization. How are you going to get the resources there to do this? Time management. What's your timeline? Working memory. You got to remember who's doing what part of things. And self-monitoring. Along the way, you got to say, how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? Now think about this in terms of young children. How able are they to plan at certain ages? How can they organize their materials? How do they know how long something is going to take? How many children wait to the last minute before making a book report that they needed to start reading 2 weeks ago? And working memory, can they remember to take their book to school? Did they even know what the assignment was? And monitoring themselves. So these skills that we call executive skills take 2 decades to develop, and they develop very slowly over time. Our job as a parent or a teacher is to be the child's frontal lobes while theirs is developing. The second set of these executive skills, which is the big name for all the skills the frontal lobe does, besides the thinking ones we just talked about, are the behavioral or emotional skills. The frontal lobes allow us to have impulse control. It allows us to regulate our emotions so we just don't get so overwhelmed or so angry and sidetracked. It allows us to have flexibility, to shift from one thought to the next thought, in essence, to multitask. It allows us to have task initiation, to start a project, and persistence, despite obstacles, to finish it. Again, as a CEO or the boss of a company, I can tell you that there's times where it's hard for me. I start a project and I don't finish it because there's so many obstacles. Or I'm focused on one project and 8 projects need my attention, and I get so overwhelmed that my emotions kind of stop the process again. So these executive skills, as you can see, really are the skills of a CEO, of our brain. And even though they come from this area called the frontal lobe, they integrate with every area of the brain. Just like me as the CEO, I interact with every person who works with me so that I know what's going on in each phase. So every area of the frontal lobe is engaged with every other area of the brain. Now think about this in terms of what we need to do with children. If children takes 2 decades for them to develop impulse control, 2 decades for them to regulate their emotions, 2 decades for them to start a task and finish it, we still again have to be the child's frontal lobe as these develop. We must model these. And again, Conscious Discipline is the program that teaches you how to access, develop, strengthen your frontal lobes, so in turn you can help develop the frontal lobes.
My name is Walt Heyer, and I used to be a transgender. In fact, I lived 8 years as a transgender female. The reason I'm no longer a transgender is because I found the truth. And I found out, it took me a long time to discover the truth, but I started my journey of what they call transgenderism at the age of 4 and struggled with my gender identity for most of my life, and eventually got married in my early 20s, had 2 children. I was an executive for an automobile company. I worked on the Apollo space missions as an associate design engineer on cryogenic connectors, and struggled still with my identity until I went to one of those people they call experts in gender identity. In fact, the guy I went to was the guy who authored the original Harry Benjamin International Standards of Care, so he was an expert. And so he diagnosed me with gender identity disorder, or gender dysphoria, and said the cure for your problems that started when you were 4 was hormone therapy and gender reassignment surgery. And so I went through the protocols and spent the 2 years between the time I was first diagnosed wondering if this was going to work. And eventually in April of 1983, I underwent gender reassignment surgery in Trinidad, Colorado. It was a few years after that, about 5 or 6 years after that, I began to study psychology and of addictions at UC Santa Cruz, and began to crack open the books and found out that people who identify as a transgender are actually suffering from a variety of what they call comorbid disorders: schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, body dysmorphic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and many other disorders that the people who are experts, like my doctor, was never paying any attention to. And it's, frankly speaking, from my point of view as a former young child who did this, it's child abuse, and it shouldn't be done.
It's not enough to simply know that these things are happening in our world. We have to understand why. Why are so many children coming out and saying they're trans? Where did this even come from? We have to look at our media. We have to look at why so many college students truly believe that abortion is not murder. Let's look at the effects that media has. Firstly, it influences our thinking. In psychology, there is something called priming. This is when you will recall old ideas that can be transmitted into our thinking through subliminal messaging. Agenda setting is important for this as well. So through priming, you have agenda setting, which is kind of gatekeeping. So that chooses the story that is to be told. So if you have news organizations such as NBC, ABC, CNN, BBC, CBS, and they're all choosing the same story, they then frame the story, which is the spin that is applied to the message or how to tell the story. And this is where you'll see if something is in support of an issue or not in support of an issue. So for example, if a television show has a doctor coming on talking about the brain development and applying it to this idea of transgender children, then you have another show which brings on a kid who says that they are just being themselves. This is a form of framing to figure out how the media wants you to think about an issue. So if we know that organizations such as NBC and ABC are owned by Disney, then we know that the agenda is the same and that the framing will be the same, and this will be passed down to children through cartoons, and this is part of cultivation. This is when you blur lines between the real world and the world that is presented on TV, and it is designed specifically to change and influence the ideas of society. Especially when it comes from an attractive source. When it comes from an attractive source, we are more likely to agree with it. This is why you have so many people who agree with what Hollywood has to say and these major celebrities. There's something in our brains that gives it credibility to the source because we like the source. It is the same thing for a child who watches a cartoon. This will give you an idea, and you will then adopt that type of thinking. So in terms of these issues, like transgender, LGBTQ agenda, and abortion, these are all attacks on our youth, on the sexuality of the youth, that is even promoting pedophilia and inordinate affection as markers of childhood identity. And we know this is done through what kids are exposed to. It is time to turn off our television. It is time to start thinking for ourselves about these types of issues. Pray that God will have mercy on this country, because this country is headed for judgment. This country is headed for destruction. because God will not sit back and allow this destruction of innocent life. So America, wake up. Church, wake up. Let's stop focusing on ourselves and our own problems. Let's start fasting and repenting before God for the sins of this country.
I heard another voice from heaven.
Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed, mix double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as queen, and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine. And she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her.